My twin sister and I were adopted by the mistress and the legitimate wife respectively. With the manipulation of my adoptive mother, who was the mistress, I made my debut as a child star and became a famous movie queen known to every household, winning so many awards that my hands were full. While my sister, who followed the neglected legitimate wife, became a marginal figure in the wealthy family after graduating from university. After I became famous, the media often compared my sister unfavorably with me, saying things like, "Fake socialites might as well come to the entertainment industry to be the stand-in for our movie queen." On the day when a powerful tycoon successfully proposed to me, my sister suddenly went crazy and tried to drag me to perish together with her. I was reborn and went back to the orphanage. In this life, she couldn't avoid the legitimate wife fast enough and said, "Sister, it's your turn to endure hardships in the wealthy family for me." It was hilarious. She actually didn't want this kind of life where resources were easily available and she was born with a silver spoon in her mouth. The richest couple in Haishur visited the orphanage quietly, intending to adopt a daughter. When we got to the door, my sister refused to go in no matter what. "You girl. Usually, you're always the most eager. Why don't you see such a good opportunity?" The dean was so angry that he pulled her ear. She shouted in pain, "I'd rather not have this kind of good fortune. Some people may seem rich on the surface, but in fact, they don't know how pitiful their lives are." The dean's face turned pale with fright and he covered her mouth tightly. Inside the room, Richard stood up and kicked the chair away. "Humph, we can have our own children. Why should we rush to humiliate ourselves? Let's go. Do we still want to stay here and be laughed at?" Grace ignored him and pointed at me. "Isn't there another one here?" My sister said in a sarcastic tone, "Sister, you go. It's a wealthy family. You'll live a happy life with good food and drinks." Although Grace was a bit surprised by my sister's targeting, she quickly shifted her gaze to me. I nodded hurriedly. She smiled faintly, stood up and said, "Then let's go through the adoption procedures." Richard sneered and simply left her behind and turned around to leave. His back was full of anger. At this moment, everyone knew that the relationship between the richest couple was extremely bad. My sister stared at Grace's back resentfully and then cursed in a low voice, "Loser." Everyone thought she was crazy. Who would dare to adopt her after she offended Richard's family so blatantly? But she had nothing to fear. When saying goodbye, she leaned over and whispered, "Sister, you don't have a chance anymore. In this life, I'm going to take away the mother who has been planning for you wholeheartedly." I also smiled. Indeed, there was no chance. After this incident, it would be too late for my sister to regret even if she wanted to. My sister not only dared to offend Grace but was even prepared to be her enemy for the rest of her life. In the previous life, in order to be adopted by Grace, she poured water on my quilt in the middle of the night, which made me have a high fever and couldn't get up the next day. Without me, her biggest competitor, she got adopted by the wealthy family as she wished. I originally thought that our lives would be completely different from then on. Unexpectedly, just after she was taken away, Richard's mistress, Natalie, brought a large number of media reporters to the orphanage and specifically asked to adopt me. Natalie tore off my fever-reducing patch, dressed me up nicely, and took pictures and interviews in front of the media. The fact that the mistress and the legitimate wife adopted twin sisters at the same time naturally became a hot topic on the internet. My face was flushed, and my eyes were misty and cute. Netizens exclaimed that I was so lovely. In addition, the outside world speculated that Natalie had ulterior motives for adopting me, which made me receive unprecedented attention. Natalie was originally an internet celebrity. Taking this opportunity, she helped me make my debut as a child star. I had a continuous stream of announcements, and she also gained huge traffic. Even Richard publicly showed partiality towards me and allowed me to call him Dad. Compared with our rapid progress, Grace, the legitimate wife, never expressed her stance or fought back in the face of our blatant provocations. Even when Natalie took me to have several face-to-face with her, she just smiled faintly and avoided our sharpness. Her attitude of not competing or striving made my sister suffer a lot of neglect and ridicule following her. Every time she met my sister was always jealous and aggrieved, feeling disappointed in Grace. In the following years, I had a smooth journey in my career and was always successful in the entertainment industry. My sister went to a noble school, and her weekends were filled with various cram schools and private tutoring. She was under strict supervision. Grace was from a noble family after all, and she naturally knew how to plan for my sister. After graduating from university, she arranged a marriage with a suitable family for my sister. For my sister, who had no inheritance rights and had been marginalized in the wealthy family, this was her only chance to turn things around. On that day, she posted a message on her WeChat Moments that was only visible to me: "The loser has finally done a good thing. Now I understand that actresses are just actresses after all. Mother and daughter are the same, just playthings of the wealthy family at most." Natalie got the news and was furious. "Reject all your suitors and make Alexander your official boyfriend. Didn't he just give you jewelry worth millions of yuan?" she said jealously. "Grace will never beat me, not even once." Having failed to become the legitimate wife for over 10 years, she hated Grace extremely, and her actions became more and more impatient. Later, reporters photographed me staying overnight in a hotel with Alexander. When the media asked him about his marriage with my sister, he firmly denied it, saying, "That was just an arrangement by my family, just a commercial hype." On the day when I won the movie Queen title, Alexander sent several helicopters to propose to me. The sound of fireworks and the fragrance of flowers filled the whole Xinjiang that night. Some media stopped Grace and my sister and asked them for their opinions on this matter. Grace just replied faintly, "Everyone has their own aspirations. We shouldn't force them." My sister's years of resentment and grievance completely erupted. She lost control of her expression due to anger and left Grace behind and walked away alone. The mistress and the legitimate wife in Richard's family had been fighting for years without a clear winner. But our lives were going to be completely different from then on. She went crazy and drove her car to hit me, trying to perish together with me. In this life, my sister was adopted by Natalie as she wished, and the internet was full of hot topics about them. When Richard was asked whether Natalie's act was deliberately provoking the legitimate wife, he looked doting and said, "She's a bit headstrong, but I believe she'll be responsible for the child." The next day, Natalie said arrogantly, "Some people claim to be from noble families. I'd like to see whose child is more promising in the end." These words were simply rubbing Grace's face on the ground. Grace didn't respond. She was busy. She had a company to manage behind her, and she also had to choose schools for me, interview private tutors, and even tutor me with my homework in person at night. When Richard didn't come home at night, she took me to sleep with her. I hugged her soft and fragrant body and slept more soundly than ever before. This kind of sincere, unselfish love and company, my sister didn't even know how to cherish. The heat of the adoption news gradually subsided, but Natalie's provocations never stopped. 1 month later, Richard rarely returned home. Natalie immediately followed him. We were having dinner when she rushed into Richard's arms like a flying butterfly. "Our dear daughter has got the endorsement of the Huas. You clearly said that you would accompany us to celebrate." My sister's eyes were red, and she pulled his clothes with an aggrieved look on her face. "Uncle Richard," Natalie glared at her and said coquettishly. "What uncle? Call him Dad." My sister glanced at Grace and shrank her neck, not daring to make a sound. Richard tapped his fingers on the table with a half-smile. Natalie's eyes fluttered. "Yo-yo, are you afraid that Miss Isabella will blame you for offending her that day? Adoption is all about fate. For children, they like someone or not, and that's understandable." Richard put down the soup bowl and said, "Grace, what's your opinion?" Grace pulled me to stand up with a calm expression on her face and said, "This is your own business." Richard's face stiffened and he gritted his teeth. "Fine." He picked up my sister and sat her on his lap. "From now on, you can call me Dad. I'd like to see who dares to have an objection." My sister pointed at me and said, 1 month later, Richard rarely returned home. Natalie immediately followed him. When we left the living room, that mother and daughter had already sat down and continued to have dinner with Richard. We could still hear their laughter from a distance. Back in the study, Grace asked me, "Are you upset?" I grinned and shook my head. I was actually happy that I didn't have to call Richard Dad. I had already felt disgusted enough when I called him that in my previous life. She nodded and there was a bit of warmth in her usually calm expression. "Just focus on your studies." Before going to bed, she had a rare serious conversation with me. "Isabella, but the property of Richard's family has nothing to do with you. Your Uncle Richard had a son before marriage. Don't compete or think about it. Adopting you is my personal decision, and I will be responsible for you." I nodded and hesitated for a moment before asking, "Mom, didn't you want to have children with him?" "All you need to know is that he and I won't have children. In the previous life, they indeed didn't have children. The outside world had once speculated how long their marriage would last, but Richard never mentioned divorce. Once, Grace was photographed on a date with someone. Richard actually lost his composure on the spot, flew into a rage, and threatened that he wouldn't let that media outlet off easily. As a result, Natalie went crazy that day and smashed the house to pieces. On the way home from school, the car was suddenly forced to stop. My sister, dressed up gaudily, knocked on my window. Seeing that I was holding a book in my hand, she shook her head with a tut-tut sound. "Sister, are you overwhelmed by studies? Does that old witch still stipulate that you must be home at 5 o'clock? It's so funny. That old witch only gives you the identity of a socialite. In the end, you'll still be driven out and become an office worker, working for others." She lifted her skirt and twirled around on the spot. "Sister, earning over 10,000 yuan a month is already the limit of your pursuit. Unlike me, I can gain both fame and fortune. Moreover, in this life, you're even worse off than me. Following the legitimate wife, you don't even have the right to call him Dad." She was extremely smug. "Sister, I'm better than you. It took me only 1 month to win Richard over. Do you know how many benefits this Dad can bring me?" She expected to see a sad and disappointed expression on my face. However, I looked at her body, which was even thinner than when she was in the orphanage, and the dark circles under her eyes that couldn't be covered by makeup, and smiled faintly. "Is singing, dancing, and constantly going on announcements really easier than my studying?" Natalie had never been an easygoing person. Taking advantage of the popularity, she would definitely squeeze out all of her sister's value. In the previous life, my sister only saw the side of me that didn't have to study and was always dressed up beautifully. She compared my glamorous life with the dullness of her own studies. Naturally, she thought her life was bitter and gloomy. Only when she had truly suffered would she understand that the hardship of studying was nothing at all. "I don't believe you don't understand. You're just a tool for Natalie to please Richard and provoke my mother." I looked at her prematurely developed body. "Also, if Natalie gives you some pills, you'd better check them first." Her face changed. "What pills? Don't talk nonsense." "Ha, sister, you don't want me to get the same treatment as you. You're afraid that I'll be as successful as you." I shook my head and didn't try to persuade her anymore. Sooner or later, she would understand that for children like us who didn't have the talent of child stars, it was impossible to easily establish a foothold in the entertainment industry just relying on popularity. Besides, Natalie was obsessed with marrying Richard. For now, they could still act like a loving mother and daughter, but day after day, if she couldn't become the legitimate wife, her bipolar disorder would become more and more uncontrollable. In the previous life, she forced me to climb up by any means, suppressed Grace out of jealousy, and tried to attract Richard's attention. When Richard had a new love interest, she would blame me for being useless, pinch my thighs and back until they were bruised to vent her anger. And later, for fear of being discovered, she switched to using needles. "Shut up. I can make you famous, and I can also make you lose everything." It wasn't until I won my first award in life at a certain age that she didn't dare to lay hands on me anymore. The words, "marrying into a wealthy family," were her dream. But they were my worst nightmare. I didn't understand. Natalie actually had many opportunities in life. As long as she worked a little harder, she could become a wealthy person herself. But she still lived like a daughter plant that was overbearing and clinging. She would be complacent about Richard's favor and show off her bags, clothes, shoes, and diamond rings in a high-profile way. However, she couldn't see that Grace, taking advantage of her identity as Richard's wife, had managed the nearly bankrupt Isabella family thriving, and her personal wealth had climbed into the top 10 of the rich list. She tried her best to occupy a small space on the entertainment gossip pages, but ignored that Grace was a frequent figure on the financial pages. Not only Natalie was obsessed, but my sister was the same. In the previous life, when she stood at the peak, she could only see the false prosperity deliberately presented by me and Natalie. Using a man's cheap preference to define the winner or loser between the legitimate wife and the mistress was really stupid. Before long, I skipped 2 grades and still handled my studies with ease. So I boldly proposed to Grace that I wanted to venture into the stock market. "Mom, I promise it won't affect my studies." She didn't agree on the spot. Instead, she quietly observed me for a month before handing over her personal account to me. There was 10,000 yuan as the starting fund in the account. I was overjoyed and kissed her. She touched my head and asked with a smile, "You didn't curse me for being stingy in your heart, did you?" I stuck out my tongue. "I know you're just afraid that I'll be distracted by trifles and lose my ambition. If you lose all the money, come to me again." I nodded, and it was hard to hide my smugness. There was no way I would lose money. Life became rich in this way. I was busy learning to trade stocks, and Grace was busy expanding the business of the Isabella family. With my sister's cooperation, Natalie managed to keep Richard so enchanted that he didn't want to leave. My sister also benefited from Richard's influence and started to act in TV dramas, getting involved in the film and television circle earlier than I did in my previous life. However, there would always be times when Richard thought of us. One night in the middle of the night, I was suddenly awakened. In the darkness, a huge dark figure was pressing on Grace. "Get out. Don't wake Isabella up," she growled in a low voice. "Ha, you've become addicted to being a mother. Why don't we have a child?" That I in the darkness, the sound of clothes being torn came in waves. My eyes instantly turned bloodshot. I turned over and got out of bed, and bit hard on Richard's arm. "Hiss! Little bastard, get away." He swung his hand hard. Grace screamed, "Isabella!" I was like a little calf, using both my hands and feet to hold on to Richard tightly, biting even deeper. There was a fierce look in my eyes. He couldn't bully my mother. Richard was enraged by me and grabbed my hair hard. Finally, Grace couldn't bear it anymore and rushed up to wrestle with him. In the end, Richard completely lost his interest and cursed angrily, "Make this little brat let go. I won't touch you tonight." Grace hugged me and comforted me for a long time before I let go warily. Then, 2 teeth with blood on them fell out. After Richard left in a fury, I cried until my eyes were red. "Mom, don't want him. Let's divorce him, okay?" I knew better than anyone else that Grace didn't love Richard. Especially when gossip like Richard staying overnight in Natalie's boudoir emerged. The look of disgust and nausea in her eyes was hard to conceal. "Isabella, now is not the time," she said wearily and closed her eyes. "No, we can." I immediately showed her the long list of figures in my stock market account. Her eyes widened slightly. "Isabella, is it enough?" She helped me put on my clothes and took me out to deal with my wounds. "This isn't something you should consider right now. Until my specific age, birthday." She suddenly wanted to change my surname and had a big fight with Richard. "You have sons and daughters. Isabella has always called you uncle. Whether she takes your surname or not has no impact on you." A hint of remorse flashed in Richard's eyes and he left angrily. Since then, I became Isabella. Grace took me to the company, and I spent all the winter and summer vacations of that whole year in her office. At first, I was just trading stocks purely. Later, I gradually helped her handle official business and became familiar with the group's affairs. On my specific age, birthday, Grace took me to attend a charity reception and officially let me get in touch with her network of contacts. I knew that from then on, I was completely on a life path completely different from that in my previous life. When I was chatting attentively with a group of business seniors, Richard arrived at the venue with Natalie and my sister. Richard walked towards the main hall. When my sister saw me and wanted to follow him in, Richard refused her. She stamped her feet on the spot and glared at me resentfully. As soon as Richard came in, he scolded me. "What are children doing here when adults are talking about business? Get out." I exchanged a glance with Grace, bid farewell to everyone gracefully, and obediently left. Just as I walked to the front hall, "Isabella, over here." My nominal brother waved to me, and a bunch of teenagers around him were making a fuss. My sister was holding Alexander's hand, looking very affectionate. It seemed that in this life, she had managed to win Alexander over early. "You should keep an eye on her. Is the organizer's site a place she can go? Richard's family has lost all its face." My sister was still furious about not being able to follow Richard to the main venue just now. "If you had a good mother, you could go too." Luke didn't sound friendly. Alexander smiled and smoothed things over. "Come on, Yo-Yo isn't from our circle anyway." Then he explained to my sister, "General Manager Isabella is cultivating Isabella as her successor, which is different from us." It would have been better if he hadn't said that. My sister's face instantly turned red with anger and shame. "What kind of magic potion did you give Grace?" She glared at me fiercely. "Ha, just shut up. You're making a fool of yourself." The eldest daughter of the Ophelia family, who had been silent all along, sneered and interrupted. "Fortunately, General Manager Isabella is female. Otherwise, I'm afraid you'd spread rumors that Isabella was good in bed." Luke said in an ambiguous tone, "Isabella does sleep in the same bed with my mom. I'm even jealous." Everyone burst out laughing. A hint of impatience flashed in Alexander's eyes. "Don't talk if you don't understand. The big project that the Isabella family won the bid for recently was done by Isabella." Finally, my sister saw the situation clearly and stopped targeting me. When I went to the bathroom, she followed me in and couldn't wait to ask, "What tricks did you play on my brother? Why is he defending you like this?" I tidied my hair in front of the mirror. "What? Didn't you two get along well before?" She stared at me with fire in her eyes. I smiled and stopped teasing her. "I won't take a penny from the Richard family. Why should he make things difficult for me? What about Grace? She's always been cold-blooded and selfish." "Shut up." I interrupted, and my face turned cold. "She's the best mother in the world. Don't let me hear you attacking her again." "So what if I said it?" She puffed out her chest and came at me aggressively. "I'll say it. She's an inhumane old witch." I slightly raised my hand. But thinking about the occasion today, I put it down again. However, my sister didn't stop. She went crazy at me for a while and then suddenly covered her face and rushed out. By the time I walked to the front hall, everyone had been alarmed by her. Richard was hugging my sister and confronting Grace. My sister's cheeks were flushed, her hair was messy, and she was crying pitifully. Her impressive bosom was heaving up and down as she cried in Richard's arms. If she hadn't been calling Richard Dad, this scene would have made people think a lot. Natalie cried, "I can understand if Isabella wants to vent her anger on someone, but come at me. What's the point of bullying my daughter? She has a scene to shoot tomorrow. Beating her face like this is clearly trying to ruin her future." Richard rubbed his sister's cheek with his finger and glanced coldly at Grace. "Immediately ask Isabella to come out and apologize to Yo-Yo. How did you teach your child?" I walked over slowly. "Uncle Richard, before blaming the legitimate wife and supporting your lover and her daughter, shouldn't you find out the whole story first?" Richard narrowed his cold eyes. "Say that again." The organizer, Howard, hesitated for a moment and persuaded, "General Manager Richard, Isabella bullied me." "That's okay. But she even didn't take Dad seriously and said Dad was a dirty cucumber that only we would want eagerly," my sister shouted. "I wasn't convinced, so she beat me like this." Richard grabbed my neck with one hand. "What the hell are you? You're asking for death." You're doomed, my sister mouthed silently at me, looking confident of victory. I stared coldly at Richard and didn't beg for mercy. He had wanted to get rid of me for a long time. From the initially unfamiliar Uncle Richard to me being a third wheel between him and my mom for several years and those 2 deep bite marks on his arm. The feeling of suffocation hit me like seawater. I gritted my teeth and didn't make a sound. Do you know that being so stubborn will make me want to destroy you? Ha, you think Grace will protect you? Richard sneered and his eyes became bloodthirsty. He ordered, Grace, I'll give you 3 days to send this little bastard back to the slums. I'll make sure she stays in the gutter for the rest of her life and can't turn over. It was everyone's perception that Grace couldn't possibly protect me and confront Richard. After the two got married, no matter how Natalie provoked her, she had never embarrassed Richard in public. Now it was just about asking her to abandon an adopted daughter. Just when I was about to lose consciousness due to lack of oxygen, Richard, just try to touch Isabella. Grace's cold voice came. Richard's fingers stiffened. I felt relieved in my heart and pushed him away hard. Do you know what you're talking about? Richard turned around, his face so dark that it seemed water could drip from it. Grace put her arm around me and sneered, Richard, are you sure you want to bring your romantic affairs to the business level without considering the consequences? What do you mean? The Xiangjiang Cross Harbor Tunnel project is under Isabella's responsibility. Since General Manager Richard doesn't get along with the person in charge, then I announce that we will retender the part of the project that the Richard family is involved in. Everyone here is welcome to participate actively. The people who had been watching from the sidelines immediately became restless. Richard's face turned pale. Natalie had never taken Grace seriously. She tugged at his sleeve and said with disdain, Richard, the Isabella family would have gone bankrupt long ago without your support. And now she's actually kicking away the ladder after crossing the river. Humph, if we don't participate, then so be it. Without the Richard family, I'd like to see how she'll deal with it later. Shut up. Richard was furious and slapped Natalie across the face. Natalie covered her face, looking incredulous. With her vision, of course, she wouldn't know that the Xiangjiang Cross Harbor Tunnel was the most profitable project of the Richard family's group in recent years. This blow was no different from cutting a piece of flesh from Richard. Grace smiled faintly. Miss Natalie, Richard's affection for you is priceless. You've won. Richard was so choked that he couldn't say a word and his chest heaved violently. At this time, Alexander pushed Luke and me. Do you think this will be on the financial news or the entertainment news tomorrow? This made everyone burst out laughing. Grace looked at the bright red finger marks on my neck and her eyes turned cold. Richard, the daughter I've taught is definitely not someone who argues just for the sake of arguing. Are you sure you found out the truth? My sister pointed at me and screamed. I heard it with my own ears. She's long been unhappy that Dad favors us. I shook my head. I never took it to heart in the first place, so how could I be unhappy about it? Grace smiled and pointed at my chest. The first time I took Isabella out to see the world, for the convenience of her learning and reviewing later, I asked her to wear a recording pen. If you want to know the truth, just ask the staff to play it. Natalie blurted out, Fine, let's listen. I'd like to see who'll make a fool of themselves then. My sister looked at the cat's eye brooch on my chest in horror and instantly lost all her color. She tugged at Natalie's sleeve and shook her head gently. Natalie immediately panicked and glared at her in disappointment. Then she smiled and said, Richard, actually, this is just a quarrel between the two sisters. It'll sound so bad if it's played out. Let's just assume that our yo-yo heard it wrong. My sister nodded repeatedly. Dad, I was too fussy. I'm sorry. Richard's face relaxed. All right. Since Isabella hit Yo-Yo and you've already vented your anger for her, don't mention this again. Haha, the magic potion of these two mother and daughter was really something special. A hint of disappointment flashed in Grace's eyes and she shook her head. This concerns Isabella's reputation. We must make it clear. What do you want? Richard gritted his teeth. He wasn't stupid. Naturally, he could see my sister's guilt. It's just that he had wanted to put me to death when he believed her one-sided story at the beginning, and now it was impossible for him to get out of this cleanly. As the heir of the Isabella family, Isabella can't be slandered for no reason. The three of you must publicly apologize to her. Grace, don't go too far. Then I can only say that the Cross Harbor Tunnel project will just be the beginning of our reckoning with the Richard family. Grace's gaze was firm and her words were powerful. It meant that she wouldn't let this go easily. Richard looked at her in shock. Grace's sudden toughness made him a bit at a loss. He didn't expect that Grace would go to such lengths for me. What surprised him even more was that he found that Grace was no longer the person he could manipulate at will in the past. Play it. He glared fiercely at Natalie and her daughter. When the staff took away the recording pen, my sister suddenly turned around and wanted to run, but Luke held her down tightly. Didn't you want my dad to avenge you? Why the rush? She could only watch helplessly as her tricks were exposed in front of everyone. The recording was played quickly. So it was her who called Richard a dirty cucumber. The eldest daughter of the Ophelia family was extremely surprised. And she also cursed herself for eagerly wanting the dirty cucumber. Luke sneered, if she didn't curse harshly, who would believe her? My sister's face turned red with anger and she argued loudly, no. It's not like that. I just said what was on Isabella's mind. Dad, believe me. Alexander took a few steps back to keep a distance from her. Isabella didn't mention Richard once throughout the whole process, but you cursed Grace several times. I gave him a thoughtful look. It seemed that Alexander's family was determined to win this project. Tonight, Richard's face had been completely lost by Natalie and her daughter. Get out. He spat out a word through gritted teeth. The mother and daughter, who were already paralyzed with fear, didn't dare to say a word and fled in a panic without looking back. Finally, under the witness of everyone, Richard said, sorry, to me reluctantly and then left the venue without looking back. It could be foreseen that the good days of Natalie and her daughter, who had been making waves in Highshire for years, were coming to an end. As soon as we got into the car, Grace slapped me on the forehead. Satisfied? I stuck out my tongue and smiled. Anyway, we were bound to fall out with Richard sooner or later. I think tonight was a good opportunity. My sister started this drama, but I had always been in control of how it would play out. With what happened today, the Isabella family could gradually cut ties with the Richard family. I didn't take out the recording pen at the beginning and Grace immediately understood my intention. She endured until the situation got out of hand and then stepped forward at the last moment. We cooperated tacitly. Even so, she still shook her head and sighed. Mom, the Isabella family has developed very well. You don't need to continue to be aggrieved in the Richard family. I said. Isabella, only when you care will you feel aggrieved. Otherwise, do you think I'm really that magnanimous? Grace looked at me with a mixture of amusement and helplessness. But I'd rather Mom be with someone pleasant to the eye instead of a dirty cucumber. Of course I knew that she had never thought of getting emotional value from Richard. As long as Richard remained the richest man in Highshire and was beneficial to the development of the Isabella family, there was no need to fall out with him. Mom, Uncle Richard is becoming more and more absurd because of Natalie and them. Can he really lead the Richard family well? Even as a partner, he's unqualified. Grace carefully considered my words for a while and was finally convinced by me. She said helplessly, I know. Let's sort out our cooperation projects when we get back. I cheered and hugged her tightly. When I was younger, I felt aggrieved for her for a while. But later I realized that she was more clear-headed than any other woman. Before marrying Richard, she was the only daughter of the Isabella family's group, the top socialite in Haicheng, and also had a boyfriend she had been in love with for years. The change started when Grace's grandfather died suddenly in a car accident. Her uncle wanted to take over the company. She had just graduated at that time. How could she be a match for her uncle, an old fox in the business world? Her boyfriend not only didn't support her from behind but was also bribed by her uncle and tampered with her car. If she hadn't been lucky, she would have died long ago. Wealth stirs people's hearts. She was desperate and sought cooperation from Richard, the famous playboy in Haicheng. The marriage alliance was proposed by Richard and she agreed. At the beginning, she did want to live a good life with Richard. At least with Richard's wealth, he wouldn't covet the Isabella family. Who would have thought that after marriage, Richard suddenly had a teenage illegitimate son? Then his mistress kept provoking. She resolutely cut her losses in time. Since she didn't want to be too deeply involved with Richard, she decided to adopt a daughter and from then on, only regarded Richard as a business partner. Over the years, she had devoted all her energy to the development of the Isabella family. She wasn't bound by the marriage alliance. In fact, since she didn't take Richard seriously, there was no need for me to persuade her to break the current situation. However, thinking about the disgusting things Richard did in my previous life and that in this life my sister had taken my place, no one knew how things would develop. I had to take precautions and protect Grace first. Grace did what she said and really excluded the Richard family's group. Richard had always been proud and also withdrew from the Cross Harbor Tunnel project neatly without getting too entangled. After the cooperation fell through, the media all said that Natalie and her daughter were too much and that Grace finally took action to deal with them. After this incident, Natalie did become a lot more low-key. But on my sister's side, after being quiet for a few days, she appeared in public with a new endorsement in a high-profile manner. It was said that the endorsement was arranged by the Public Relations Department of the Richard family. "Excuse me, what's your view on General Manager Isabella's counterattack?" a reporter asked. She smiled brightly and made a heart gesture towards the camera. "I have no feud with her. Besides, thank you, Daddy, for your support." When Grace attended the groundbreaking ceremony of the Cross Harbor Tunnel, the media wouldn't let go of this matter. "General Manager Isabella, you've fallen out with General Manager Richard, and now General Manager Richard has publicly supported his lover's daughter. Is he expressing his dissatisfaction with you?" "Yes. Will this incident affect your marriage with General Manager Richard?" "There are reports saying that General Manager Richard's move is to force you to bow your head and admit your mistakes to him. Will you compromise for the future cooperation between the two families?" The magnesium lights kept flashing, and the reporters enthusiastically followed her to the side of the car. Grace finally stopped, and a trace of impatience and distress flashed across her brows. She looked at the camera, thought for a moment, and said, "I'm sorry for taking up public resources. I'm currently discussing divorce with Richard. The specific details are not convenient to disclose. Please don't make unfounded speculations and wait patiently for the good news." All the reporters were stunned when they heard this news. They didn't expect that for the expected TV series-like drama, the parties involved directly ended it. I politely pushed aside the reporters and let Grace get into the car. "Mom, you've finally made up your mind," I said with a smile as the car drove out of the port. Grace rubbed her temples and shook her head. "Isabella, you're right. Richard is indeed an unqualified partner." She could tolerate Richard's womanizing, but it definitely couldn't extend to business in the marketplace. This time, Richard had touched her bottom line. It was said that when Richard heard that Grace took the initiative to propose divorce, he smashed several antiques at home. Not willing to be outdone, he announced the next day that he would no longer endorse the Isabella family and ordered the finance department to cut off the financial transactions with the Isabella family. He thought that Grace wouldn't be able to get loans from the bank and would obediently admit defeat after failing in financing. However, he didn't know that we never fought unprepared battles. Supported by the stock market earnings over the years, the capital chain of the Isabella family was healthier than that of all other enterprises. But this divorce case, due to the deep involvement of the two groups' cooperation for several years, actually dragged on for 5 years. It was only after the final project of both sides was completed and settled that Richard walked into the Civil Affairs Bureau with a dark face. On that day, Natalie, who hadn't shown up for a long time, took Richard's black card and swept through luxury stores, looking smug as if she was about to become the legitimate wife. And this year was also the time when the movie Deep Alley, for which I won the Movie Queen title in my previous life, was preparing to start filming. During these 5 years, with the help of the Richard family, my sister had already become a popular traffic actress. The media joked that she was the biggest beneficiary of the divorce between Richard and Grace. Although Alexander was still her escort, unfortunately, after being ambiguous for many years, she hadn't even got the title of Alexander's girlfriend. Once at a reception, she stopped me in the bathroom. "Sister, as long as I get the leading role in Deep Alley, and win the movie queen title again, Alexander will definitely marry me." She glanced at me contemptuously. "As for you, you don't really think that Grace will give you the Isabella family, do you? She's just using you. Once the Isabella family is stable, she'll kick you out. I'll marry into a wealthy family, and you'll just be a slave to the capitalists." She thought that marrying Alexander was the greatest achievement and the end of my life. She thought that my winning the movie queen title was just a means to marry into a wealthy family. I didn't argue with her about these things and just said, "It's not that easy to get director Chen's approval." The leading female character in the original work of Deep Alley was a career elite with a neutral aura, cool and efficient. She could hardly meet director Chen's height requirements. Although my sister and I were twins, back then Natalie was too eager for quick success and gave her drugs to make her develop earlier. As a result, she was X centimeters tall, X centimeters shorter than me. Over the years, due to her height, she mainly filmed costume dramas. This was also the reason why she made her debut as a child star but didn't have many outstanding representative works. When attending the red carpet events, she was often rejected by big brands because she was too petite to hold up the dresses. She lifted her curly hair and chuckled. "You don't need to worry about this, sister. I'm not some little actress without any background." I narrowed my eyes slightly. "Was it because of Richard? Richard has poured too many resources into you. Capital pursues profits. Aren't you afraid of being backlashed?" She widened her eyes as if hearing the funniest joke in the world. "Isabella, what nonsense are you talking? He's my daddy. Who else would he support if not me?" "Richard got divorced," I reminded her. "Isn't that better? Without Grace getting in the way, he'll only be nicer to me." She blew on her delicate fingernails, not taking it seriously. I sighed. "Anyway, be careful with Richard. All the gifts bestowed by fate have already been marked with a price in the dark." Why did she think that she could get something for nothing without paying a price? You're crazy. You really love to sow discord." She sneered coldly and walked away swaying her hips. I withdrew my gaze and didn't pay attention anymore. Our lives had been clearly different from each other a long time ago. Before long, my sister officially announced on Weibo that she had got the leading role in Deep Alley. This immediately stirred up a hornet's nest. The fans of the original work swarmed in to scold her, saying that she was a capital-dependent actress and shouting for her to get out and not to ruin the original work. Even the director and the film crew were attacked by the fans for having no stance and no principles and ruining their own futures. Before Deep Alley had officially started filming, it was already boycotted by thousands of people, and all parties were pessimistic about it. When facing an interview, director Chen, wearing sunglasses, sneered, "I didn't choose the female lead, but I'll do my best." The outraged fans directly rushed to the official Weibo of the Richard family, cursing Richard for covering the sky with one hand and using capital to forcefully promote his lover's daughter. The incident was so big that the stock price of the Richard family dropped for 3 consecutive days, and the product image was damaged. Richard never came forward to make a statement. A few days later, a reporter photographed my sister dating young Master Alexander in a hotel. And then Richard, who rushed over angrily, interrupted their good time. It was said that on that night, my sister was taken by Richard to his apartment and didn't come out all night. And the light in Richard's room was on all night long, which led to wild speculations. The next day, when Alexander was playing basketball, he was surrounded by reporters. He smiled faintly and said, "What others do has nothing to do with me." These words completely cut off my sister's possibility of marrying into a wealthy family. When I went back to the basement to pick up my car after working overtime, a figure suddenly rushed out and grabbed me. "Isabella, why did it turn out like this? The woman growled in a low voice, and her throat was especially hoarse. I looked at my sister in front of me. Her mouth corners were swollen, her whole body was bruised, and she looked extremely miserable as if she had been ravaged. Richard was really a brute. Why didn't you tell me? Ha, this is the result you wanted to see. She screamed hysterically, looking both stupid and pitiful. I told you, would you have believed me? I said. I'm not a fortune teller. I just know that the more she wants, the more dangerous it will be. And Richard had never been a good person. My sister stared at me fixedly. He's my dad. What kind of dad is he to you? I said. Do you have blood relations with him? Or a marriage certificate or a household registration booklet? I've been calling him that since I was a kid. She said word by word, with tears rolling down her cheeks. How could he? I looked at her indifferently. He's just your adoptive mother's lover. Your adoptive mother has lost her beauty and been abandoned by him. Why do you think he must support you? I didn't know, she shook her head. You've been in the entertainment industry for so many years. You can't be unaware that some deals don't need to be spoken out. Once you accepted it, it means you accepted the price involved. That's why Richard was so furious when he saw her in bed with Alexander and brought her back. She stared at me blankly and murmured, but he's dad, he's dad. I frowned. Richard is only 15 years older than you. He couldn't possibly have a daughter as old as you. Think about his words and deeds towards you at ordinary times. Couldn't you really sense his intentions? 5 years ago, when Richard tried to get rid of me for her sake, I already had a vague feeling that something was wrong when I saw his expression. Richard's attitude towards her went beyond simply protecting a daughter. It was more like a man's possessiveness and pity. Her eyes rolled a few times, and slowly, horror emerged on her face. Did he also, towards you in the previous life? I shook my head. No. Of course I wouldn't let him succeed, she scratched her hair hard. Ah. I was just one step away. As long as I won the movie queen title, Alexander would definitely protect me. I looked at her pityingly. Why do you always pin your hopes on men? Didn't you ever think that Alexander loves me not because I'm pretty or a star? He's willing to marry me not because of the title of movie queen either. I said word by word, it's a pity that you grew up in a wealthy family but couldn't see through the fact that businessmen value profits. Capital has never been about romantic affairs. Nor has there ever been so-called charity. If you're not strong enough yourself, you'll only become their plaything. On the way back while driving, the scenes from my previous life were replaying in my mind like a movie. That day, I finally got the leading role in the movie Deep Alley through my own efforts. After attending the investors' reception, Natalie couldn't wait to make a video call to Richard, hoping that he would come back to celebrate for me as he used to. In fact, Richard had long been tired of Natalie, but Natalie, who had wasted over 10 years of her life, was like a gambler with red eyes. She dragged me in front of the camera and said eagerly, "Come on, call him Dad. Let Dad come back. Your dad has always loved you the most. Aren't you the most promising one?" She forgot that I was no longer at the age to act coquettishly. She was only focused on winning Richard back but couldn't see the obscure light in his eyes when he looked at me. I uncomfortably pulled up my low-cut dress, pursed my lips, and said, "Dad, if you're free, of course." Richard, in his middle age, was still charming with a smile on his lips. That night, under Richard's deliberate scheme, Natalie soon got drunk and passed out. I was pushed to the corner by him. "Honey, I'm quite familiar with Director Chen. Why didn't you tell me if you wanted this role? I heard that Director Chen is very disgusted with against those who rely on resources." He lifted my chin. "Silly girl, how can you survive in the entertainment industry without resources, huh? Girls who are too stubborn won't be liked, you know." I forced a smile and avoided his hand. "Dad, what are you talking about? I don't understand." He seemed to be provoked and hugged me all of a sudden, buried his face in my neck, and took a deep breath. "Good girl, call me Dad a few more times. Dad loves to hear it." For a moment, blood rushed to my head and I pushed him away hard. He reached out from behind and grabbed me back into his arms, and his hands started to wander around my body restlessly as he gasped, "Stop pretending. Didn't Natalie adopt you just to make you seduce me?" I looked at him in shock. "Dad, how could you think of Mom like that? She loves you and wants to marry you wholeheartedly." He chuckled, hooked my chin with his finger. "Natalie just wants money. As long as you agree to be with me, I can ensure that she'll have no worries about food and clothing for the rest of her life." I felt it wasn't worth it for Natalie. I also didn't understand when Richard, who had watched me grow up since I was a kid, had such dirty thoughts about me. He was so greasy that I felt so disgusted that I wanted to vomit. I struggled hard and finally hit him with a desk lamp and staggered out of the hotel. I ran wildly on the street, and the more I ran, the clearer my mind became that I knew that Richard had shown his fangs and wouldn't let me go so easily. On a rainy night, I knocked on Alexander's door. As the most promising and ambitious second-generation heir of a wealthy family in Haicheng, he was the only one I could seek cooperation from. "Mr. Alexander, I'd like to make a deal with you." I was soaked through and shivering with cold. He touched his chin and looked at me with a half-smile. "It seems that Miss Natalie's deal is quite something." I pursed my lips. Protecting me and confronting Richard was indeed a big deal. After taking a bath, he tried to push me down. I pressed against his lips and said calmly, "Don't you want to hear what my terms are, Mr. Alexander?" He sniffed at my fingertips, looking intoxicated. "Everyone in Haishur knows that I'm a devoted admirer of Miss Natalie, huh? I'm really fond of Miss Natalie. Alexander did have some feelings for me. Otherwise, I wouldn't have come to him rashly. But I knew that this bit of affection was far from enough for Alexander. I need the identity of your official girlfriend for 2 years. Oh? His eyes narrowed. I pursed my lips. I've offended a big shot in the circle. Alexander looked at me quietly without saying a word. I took out all the assets I had accumulated in the entertainment industry after nearly 10 years of hard work. Since I was specific age a years old and knew that Natalie couldn't be relied on, I had enrolled in economics courses at university name, and graduated as the top student in my major. I spent all my free time struggling and learning from experiences in the field of investment. On the one hand, I felt disappointed in Natalie for her failure to achieve what she could have, and on the other hand, I had admiration for Grace, who was regarded by Natalie as her biggest rival in life. I regarded that woman, who was as elegant and refined as an orchid and as unyielding as one with no desires, as my idol in life. I wanted to live like her, to be my own capital. Unfortunately, when it came to investment, I could only be considered to have a little talent. All these accumulated wealth could only make Alexander look at me with new eyes just for a moment. I licked my lips and slowly told him about my career plan in acting. "Mr. Alexander, give me 2 years. If my commercial value fails to reach 100 million yuan, I'll compensate you with all my assets. I know you own a media company, and I'm willing to sign a bet agreement with you." I had calculated that as long as I kept taking on roles and filming continuously during these 2 years, as long as one of my works became popular, I would be confident that I wouldn't lose. Alexander was playing with a lighter and listening with great interest. When I finished the last word, he suddenly moved closer and said seriously, "Miss Natalie, I just realized that you're really cute. What can I do? I can't bear to reject someone as hardworking as you." "Thank you, Mr. Alexander." When he moved closer to me again, I grabbed his hand. "Mr. Alexander, you're my boyfriend, not my patron." He raised his eyebrows. "Huh?" I smiled at him. "A boyfriend, of course, should respect me." He was stunned for a moment and then burst out laughing. "You ungrateful little thing. You turn your back on me so quickly." In the following 2 years, I took on advertisements, commercial performances, filming roles, and variety shows, and became known as the hardest working actress in the entertainment industry. Fortunately, those who work hard usually have good luck. 2 years later, director Chen's Deep Alley helped me win the Best Actress award at the Golden Bull Awards. My worth far exceeded 100 million yuan stipulated in the bet agreement. On the night when I returned to China with the award, Alexander arranged a party for me on a yacht in Xiangjiang. And unexpectedly, he proposed to me grandly. My sister was so stimulated that she wanted to put me to death. But she didn't know at all that I had never cared about marrying into a wealthy family. I also rejected Alexander's proposal on the spot. The leading role in Deep Alley was changed again. My sister not only didn't get the role but also lost a lot of popularity, and her reputation kept dropping. Immediately after that, one piece of negative news about her came out after another. When Richard was willing to support her, she was equivalent to the daughter of the Richard family and thought she was superior to others. When Richard had a new love interest and Natalie was abandoned, my sister became the daughter of the mistress and was labeled as a low-quality artist. Overnight, the brands all posted on Weibo to distance themselves from her and cancelled their endorsements. It was said that just the contract compensation made her lose all the gains from her years of hard work. The TV series she starred in and the variety shows she participated in also encountered problems like face replacement, reshooting, or being mosaicked. In an instant, her high-flying career collapsed and she became a missing person in the entertainment industry. It was heard that the mother and daughter were driven out of the villa by Richard and had to live in a cheap apartment. They should have shared hardships together, but their relationship turned bad and they had internal conflicts. My sister blamed Natalie for adopting her with ulterior motives and for failing to hold Richard's heart. "You liar. You made me think that I would have a bright future by following you. It turned out to be just a shiny surface. Richard was just playing with you, and he kicked you away when he got tired of you. Ha, you're old and no longer beautiful, and you got nothing but also harmed me." Natalie grabbed her hair and cursed angrily. "You ungrateful wretch. Why did you have to seduce my man? Now everyone knows that you slept with the man you've been calling dad for over 10 years. How disgusting." My sister screamed. "You still blame me? If you were Grace, would Richard dare to treat me like this? He regarded you as a plaything. How could he treat me as his daughter? I'm not Grace, but look at what kind of person you are. If I had adopted Isabella at the beginning, with her ability, I would have lived a luxurious life long ago. It's a pity that I trained you, but you're so useless that you only know how to take advantage of those close to you." My sister hated being told that she was inferior to me the most. In this new life, these words came out of Natalie's mouth again, which was just like our lives in the previous life. She was so furious that she accidentally killed Natalie. It was said that in the detention center, she desperately begged people to notify Richard to visit her. But how could Richard get involved with a murderer? He had already forgotten about her and had a new love interest. My sister went completely crazy. Sometimes she cursed Richard as a brute and threatened to take revenge. Sometimes she showed weakness and called him dad, saying that she would agree to any request. A reporter disguised as a friend went in, and when he came out, he brought out a lot of explosive and ambiguous news about this fake father-daughter relationship. Richard's position as the richest man in Highshire was on the verge of collapsing. In fact, since 5 years ago when he publicly supported his lover and her daughter, his personal credibility had already been greatly reduced in the eyes of the business community. It was just that he was too arrogant and didn't take it seriously. Over the years, his actions had become more and more absurd, and the Richard family's group was also affected by him. When the news of his forced love affair with his lover's adopted daughter overnight was exposed, his personal reputation hit rock bottom. Now that Natalie was killed and my sister was locked up in a mental hospital due to mental disorder, Richard, as the instigator, was completely ostracized. The board of directors turned to support his son and directly drove him out of office to barely save the Richard family's group. When Grace was a specific age, years old, she directly handed over the Isabella family's group to me to manage. Finally, I've unloaded this burden. I'm going to retire early and enjoy life. She couldn't wait to book a plane ticket and fly abroad for a vacation. "Baby, there are cute guys waiting for me on the beach. Don't bother me if there's nothing important." Moi. I looked at the WeChat message and shook my head helplessly. She was really becoming livelier and livelier. Before getting off work, My secretary knocked on the door and came in, holding a bouquet of flowers in her hands. General Manager Isabella, General Manager Alexander wants to invite you to have dinner together. She sighed. General Manager Alexander is really persistent. He has been sending flowers continuously for 3 months. I didn't even raise my head. Reject it and take it home to make the house smell nice. The secretary was puzzled. General Manager Isabella, General Manager Alexander is young, handsome, and in charge of the Alexander family, surpassing his 2 elder brothers. He's now very wealthy and also so devoted. Don't you really consider it? I felt both amused and helpless. Once Alexander joked with the media that he had had a secret crush on me since he was young. When I ignored him, he had no choice but to pursue my sister instead. His reputation for being devoted and infatuated spread like this. Unexpectedly, some people actually believed this kind of joke. In my previous life, I did choose Alexander. But in this new life, I only make the best choices.